Hello to all our Bible study friends. Glad you could join us today for Saturday, November 8th, 2020. We are recording from the Plainfield Christian Science Church Independent, Plainfield, New Jersey, the United States of America, and we welcome you all on this beautiful November morning. And our moderator is Tom from New York.
Hello. So I'll start out with our quotes. One of Mrs. Eddy's students was very irritable over having to do so much domestic work. She said she did not have time for so much material work. Mrs. Eddy smiled and said, "I didn't know there was any material work." So that's from Essays Ascribed to Mary Baker Eddy and Essays and Other Footprints, commonly known as the Red Book. The next one is, after these things, Paul departed from Athens and came to Corinth, and found a certain Jew named Aquila, born in Pontus, lately come from Italy, with his wife Priscilla, because that Claudius had commanded all Jews to depart from Rome, and came unto them. And because he was of the same craft, he abode with them and wrought. For by their occupation they were tent makers. And he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath and persuaded the Jews and the Greeks. And that's from Acts 18, verses 1 to 4. And the last one, after the noon meal, Mary Baker Eddy took a drive that lasted about an hour. During that time, all duties were done, including the physical work around the rooms and the home. And that's from the daily work at Pleasant View, Mary Baker Eddy, Her Spiritual Footsteps by Gilbert Carpenter.
Thank you.
Yes.
So does someone want to sort of explain what that sentence in Acts means, or what it's telling us? And because he was of the same craft, he abode with them and he wrought, for by their occupation they were tent makers. What was he telling people?
Well, I'm not entirely sure. I'm going to give it a shot. I mean, here's this guy that he was excluded for Rome, probably through no fault of his own, and he was a tent maker. And maybe in the human way of judging things is not a very elevated craft, but still he did it. And then, because of his mindset about the whole thing, he was even able to go into the synagogue, reason, and persuade people. It gives me a picture of someone who, took what life gave him and made the best of it. And because he made the best of it, he was able to do his duty in the synagogue for God.
Well, that's right. He spread the word. And while he spread the word, he was a tent maker by trade profession. He made tents. So think about that. Paul was making tents with other people.
So no work is menial, I guess. It's just all work. It doesn't matter what you are. You can serve God. The sense I get.
Well, tent making may not seem like an elevated task, but when you need one, do you have a good one? You're so grateful for it.
Well, and I wonder, in those days, it actually might have been one of the more elevated tasks. Just about everybody else was either a farmer or a rancher. So if you had a skill, a tent maker, or a blacksmith, or a sword maker, or something like that. That was a pretty skillful skill. What I got from
because he was of the same craft. What came to me was that because he was of the same frame of mind and receptive to the truth, he abode with them. In other words, Paul found someone who was very receptive to what Paul had to say. So it was okay. It was a safe place for Paul to abide in Corinth. Of course, that was one of the seats of the early churches too, wasn't it?
Since many people did live in tents at that time, that really was more than just a passing whim, and makes me think back when I was farming, how everybody looked down on me. But funny thing is that everybody ate at least 3 times a day if they could, and I think we have a tendency to look down on the most important jobs, because shuffling papers isn't going to make people survive out in the wilderness someplace, but knowing how to make a tent or feed people is going to allow you to survive.
Exactly.
Well, yeah,
To a tent maker would be equivalent today to a builder. And Paul certainly was a spiritual builder. He built up the religion, Christianity.
Yeah, and he fostered many churches.
And the idea that he could dwell with this person, that his level of thought was spiritual, as Gary was saying, and that's the real importance. And it is what Florence said as well too. There are no menial tasks. So what Mrs. Eddy was saying in the first quote, she didn't know there was any material work. Whatever we do for the glory of God, and there's no menial, one task lesser than another. Just depends on your attitude and the spirit in which you do it. I know for many years, I cleaned the church. I cleaned the bathrooms. I did it for years. I wasn't sure I'd ever do anything but that. We all have different things we do or have done. And I always felt it was a privilege and, privilege to do that. And I know when Mrs. Evans, when she was a young woman, she strayed from Christian Science, and she came down with some, she never really said what it was. I think it was some kind of a heart condition that was very severe.
It was supposed to be fatal.
Yeah. And, she kind of realized what she'd done. She can't come back to her wonderful old-time practitioner, Nana Ritchie, her name was. And Mrs. Evans, at that time said to God that I will do anything you ask of me. I will scrub the floors of the church. I will do whatever you ask of me. And only to be healed. And she was healed completely and thoroughly. And she lived up to that vow to God, because she did start out doing what you might call lesser jobs. But as I just said, there really are no lesser jobs. She did all those jobs well, whatever came her way, and eventually becoming a practitioner and a teacher. But just as Christ Jesus started out as a carpenter. And Mrs. Eddy, it must have been in one of the Carpenter books, who did she say were her best workers?
Housewives.
Thank you. You all know the housewives, the little housewives that were, at the stove cooking, and as they cooked, they prayed.
And why do you think that was? Why do you think that they were the best workers?
Because they were humble.
Thank you. You want to repeat that so everybody can hear it?
For humility.
They were
they were humble.
Thank you.
They were humble. You see, when you're ambitious, then you lose it. Because we're told what we should have no ambition, but what?
For God.
To serve God.
Serve God in whatever way He asks us to do. And He does the promoting. And, many people stay in one craft or one skill all their lives. That's fine. If they're happy and do it well, what difference does it make, really? It's only the human mind that assigns some things being better than others.
And what does the human mind know, after all?
What does the human mind know?
Yeah, and Jesus said, whoever is greatest will be the servant.
Yes.
So, puts it in his place.
Said of Jesus that He made Himself of no reputation. So.
Yes.
Exactly.
And nobody cleans the stove and thinks, "Oh man, I'm just the best." Good way to be.
And that beautiful story of the, Eustace story about the woman who was a maid in the house, right? And someone came for healing because she was also a practitioner. I think I have that right anyway. And her way of healing was, "Tain't so, honey. Tain't so."
Yeah,
So,
simple, non-intellectual, simple.
it was not intellectual. It was just simple. "Tain't so, honey." So, all those are beautiful stories that we hear, and that's why Tom picked this story out. I mean, this person, I guess he's probably only mentioned once in the Bible. Is that right, Tom?
Aquila.
Well, that is kind of interesting because, yes, you're right. But also, he's mentioned in Chronicles. Where does it say here? It says, and the sons of Carmi, Achan, they say the same thing as Achan. Achan, the troubler of Israel, who transgressed and the thing accursed. So maybe I'm getting ahead, but this in 1 Chronicles chapter 2, verse 7, and it kind of gives some background on how people look at Achan and his frame of mind. The troubler of Israel, I
think Mary was referring to Aquila.
Aquila, yeah, Aquila.
Oh, I'm sorry. I misheard. Yeah, I'm sorry. I misheard. Sorry.
All right. Yeah, I think he was just mentioned that one time, and yet he was done a good job at what he was doing, enough to be mentioned that time. And Thomas has brought out to me that there are many people in the Bible that are just casually met or randomly mentioned here and there, but even that tells great stories. And there's a watching point. I'm trying to think of, maybe Karen will find it, but it's about I think a housewife too who said she prays unceasingly. Do you remember it, Linda?
Yeah. Everything she did, getting the wood, the cooking.
Yeah.
They asked how she did something, and she said she just prayed while she did everything. I was trying to remember it, but I don't know where it is.
Yeah, it's a beautiful story, how she prayed everything she did. She was just a humble housewife, but getting the wood, everything she did, she prayed. And so she made it something quite wonderful. Because when you pray, you're bringing the presence of God into your life. And there's no greater thing than that, whether you're in some skyscraper in New York or whether you are some
kitchen in the basement.
In the basement. And you're more likely to have God with you in the kitchen in the basement than in the skyscraper in New York. More likely.
Definitely.
So maybe to better answer the question on Aquila, I mean, just doing a quick search in the Bible, Aquila shows up in Acts, in Romans, in Corinthians, and Timothy.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I'm fairly certain that movie about Luke.
Me too.
Yeah,
yes.
I think it is Aquila and
Priscilla. Yeah. And go ahead, tell them. Yeah, that's what I was trying to remember.
Yeah, Paul is in prison in this movie, and Luke goes in to to go see him, and the Jews are there, and they're really not supposed to be in Rome anymore, and the Christians are getting severely persecuted in that movie. So, but it was quite excellent. What was the name? Was it just?
Is that the Apostle Paul? That one you liked, Gary, about Paul and being in prison?
Yeah,
yeah, and
a good movie. And Aquila and his wife Priscilla were sort of the leaders of that group.
Yeah. So they had a fairly significant role.
Yeah.
And one of them wanted to go where one of them wanted to leave and one of them didn't. But anyway, they worked it out.
Well, Aquila knew that they had to leave.
Yeah.
But Priscilla had she had friends, the people that she was helping, and she felt like she couldn't desert them.
So this was someone who wrote this story, just sort of put this into it, maybe these not necessarily factual, or maybe it was, maybe she had or whoever wrote it had other sources, but yeah, it was very interesting. Their role they played in this movie. It was a significant roles.
Yep.
If you don't mind, I'd like to comment on this last one, where Mary Baker Eddy took the drive, and during the hour that he was gone, they did all the work. From what I've heard is in her home, they spent the morning hours, much time in prayer and watching. And when it came time to do the actual work, it was done very quickly. So I thought that was a pretty good example of, who's doing the work. So this time in prayer was, establishing the power of God and realizing it actually. And then it came to fruition when the time to work actually started. So for those of us, and I count myself in this, that want to get up early in the morning and start working right away, it's kind of a good example of priorities and getting that straight, and then the benefit of doing so. And time again, that's why the book Spiritual Footsteps, as well as Precepts, but Footsteps particularly, time and time again, it shows in Mrs. Eddy's home how things had to be demonstrated. Nothing was insignificant. Whether it was the cooking of the food or the making of her dresses or cleaning the carpets, there's just story after story of these workers in her home. And in many ways, we had this privilege too, because some of us worked in Mrs. Evans' home, or we worked at church houses doing things, and everything had to be demonstrated. And that meant doing it in a timely manner. If it went on and on and on, then that wasn't a demonstration, which is why I guess it took an hour to clean everything. But we learned tremendous lessons from that. How to do it orderly, neatly. I learned all about cleaning, cooking, painting, everything. Many trades. We were all, what's the word? Rarely did we have to go anywhere else except people in the church to accomplish. As Gary's given testimonies about that, whether it was electricians, printers, painters, builders. Carol's husband was a builder. Yeah. And everyone had their various trades. It was like a little
self-sufficient community.
Thank you. That's the word I want, a self-sufficient community. But everyone you had to demonstrate it. And if you didn't, you heard about it.
I found an article in the June 2016 newsletter that I think you might be referring to, Mary. A group of ministers were talking about praying without ceasing. And the minister who was holding the meeting in his home, the maid was there, and he asked her, well, what do you say about it? And he said, can you pray all the time? And he said, because you have so many things to do. And she said, yes. When I begin to work, I pray that I have strength equal to my day. When I kindle the fire, I pray that God's work may revive my heart. As I begin to sweep out the house, I pray that my heart may be cleaned from all its impurities. And when I'm preparing and partaking of the breakfast, I desire to be fed with the sincere milk of the word. That was in June 2016 newsletter.
Thank you, Janet. That's it. And that is from a watching point. Thank you very much. That was what I was mentally searching for. Thank you. That's it. What a beautiful demonstration of how she prayed humbly. And so again, how can any task be menial when you're doing that, when you're having God's presence and power with you? And if you ever walk into our print room, usually you'll hear Carol speaking. And what are you doing?
Having to chat with God.
Yeah. She's talking to God over the newsletter, over the Liberator, where she should place this and what she should do, and right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I always ask him, is this the right place? And I get an answer.
Yes.
Yeah, either yes or no. And so I just keep working on it. And did I edit this right? Is this what you want brought out? And I'll get an answer on that too. So,
and what a beautiful job she does. Yeah. A beautiful job that she brings this Liberator quietly. Every time it's Carol working behind the scenes, gathering all the things together. People, you all contribute with your articles and paintings and other things, but testimonies, yes, all of you do that. Every time you give, you're part of this. But Carol just quietly in the background, no fanfare, back in that room talking to God and bringing it all together. And then Jeremy too, he has a conversation with the Father.
That's one of the things that most surprised me about coming here was the fact that, well, first of all, that God wanted me to continue doing the work that I did before, but then learning how to do that with prayer has been quite an interesting thing, and seeing how much better it is and how much more peaceful it is to do that, even just driving. I obviously drove before coming here, but driving, this morning I was at the end of my driveway and I have two possible ways to go out of my driveway, and I just sat there for a moment and then I got the feeling, go left. Okay, I will go left. So I just love that.
That's how it works. The more you do it, the more natural it becomes, the more clearly you hear God's voice. Starting out, maybe you feel you don't, but that's beautiful. And thank you, Janet. Finding that was a demonstration. Thank you very much. Beautiful.
You're very welcome.
Well, excellent. That was beautiful, and thank you. So while we move into our questions, so this has been a fantastic discussion. I just want to say I'm learning a lot from the people have just said, so thank you. So our topic is Achan and living quietly. So our first question is, what was Joshua's frame of mind? And I gave some references there to give some indication, but frankly, if you find something elsewhere about Joshua, that would be good too.
Well, in Matthew Henry, he said Joshua was fearless of danger because sure of the divine protection. There he was, some think, meditating and praying, and to those who are so employed, God often graciously manifests himself. Or perhaps there he was to take a view of the city, to observe its fortifications, and contrive how to attack it. And perhaps he was at a loss within himself how to make his approaches when God came and directed him. Note, God will help those that help themselves. The law succors those who watch, not those who sleep.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So,
what I love about this Joshua 5:13-15, it talks about meeting that angel of the Lord, and then the angel telling him to take his shoes off his feet. And I remembered that, in the New Testament, it talks about what the different parts of your armor are. And in Ephesians 6:15, it says, and your feet shod with the preparation of the gospel of peace. And I was thinking, well, obviously he was prepared. And it's not often we get the get told we can take a part of our armor off. Usually it's put it on, So I just thought that was interesting. He obviously was prepared to hear this message. So,
well, and he wasn't intimidated by this guy standing in front of him with his sword in his hand. Joshua had total confidence in God. He was, as it was read earlier, he was fearless. He was fearless because he had total confidence in God's protection. But the reason he had total confidence in God's protection was because he was totally obedient. He obeyed God down to every detail. He didn't miss a beat. He had exactly the right number of trumpets. They blared. They blew just at the right time. He revered God. He was so close to God, and understood so clearly God's omnipotence. There wasn't any other way. He didn't even consider doing anything any other way.
He had gone through the
Joshua.
Moses.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes. It's a very major point. He faithfully, one of our Bible studies, we spoke on that, Joshua, how he was in the background. He was not one of the guys that you even noticed were there too much. He was in the background. He was apprenticing. He learned from Moses. He saw Moses' steadfast obedience to God, all the wonderful things, all the wonderful demonstrations and so-called miracles. He saw, he observed, and he got the mantle cast over him when it was his turn. So he started out very, very humbly, and I don't think he sought anything great. I told you, I think last week, Gary and I watched that Gladiator movie, which I'd never seen before, but one part of it was when the emperor wanted Maximus, who was the gladiator, to become emperor, to take on the work. And Maximus said, I don't want it. And the emperor said, that is why you have to have it.
That's right. Doesn't he say, with all my heart, no?
Yeah, with all my heart, no. Mm-hmm. And time again, don't you see this in the Bible? It's people that did not seek these positions that God promotes them. And I mean, I know talking to Florence a while ago, that's certainly how we had felt about any of this. It's nothing we ever sought. You just suddenly, you get placed there, and it happens from, the obedience, step by step, and sometimes bloody footstep by bloody footstep, but not seeking it and not even wanting it, because you really knew what it is. You wouldn't want it unless you were totally prepared for it. Right, Florence?
Absolutely. And really, I think the journey here, looking back now, I see it just makes me know that only God can do this. Only God can give the increase, so to speak. I never, ever, none of this was planned in my own life. So.
Absolutely. Thank you. Not planned, not sought after, nothing. It comes.
So, there's a story we've talked about before about when Moses sent the spies into Canaan. And if you remember, this is when they had journeyed from Egypt to the land of Canaan or land of Israel. So he sent the spies in, and they came back, and everybody was afraid except for Caleb and Joshua.
Right.
To give you their kind of idea of his frame of mind.
And that was 40 days after they left the Red Sea. When they were supposed to.
Right. So since they weren't in the frame of mind, then they had to spend 40 years in the wilderness.
wandering around until all of the other spies, except Joshua and Caleb, had passed on, and the only people who were left were Joshua and Caleb and the children of everybody else. All of those naysayers, all of those fearful and disobedient spies had to pass on before the children of Israel could cross into the promised land.
So, yeah, I guess that's a good description of his frame of mind. Fearless, trusting, knowing who he was. Patient, yep.
Mm-hmm.
Willing. A servant.
Qualities of a good practitioner.
And a good anything.
And a good anything.
Good anything.
Well, great. Maybe we should talk about question 2, and then we'll get into a Bible story, which is always fun, I think. What was Achan's frame of mind? And maybe someone wants to give a high level of who Achan is and what the story was.
Well, he was coveted. He coveted what to go back to the story. The whole purpose of the going through Jericho was for God. It wasn't. He wasn't when Joshua asked the angel or the man with the sword. He said, "This is for God. I'm not on either side. This is for the purpose of God." And so that's why the spoils, anything they were to destroy the city, but then the only thing they were supposed to come out from the destruction was to serve God. All these spoils, all the what they got, the gold, silver, was to be put into the tabernacle for God. They were not personally allowed to take anything for themselves in this particular instance of overcoming Jericho. And so Achan coveted things that he saw as they were destroying Jericho. And so he personally recovered some things that he personally wanted and hid them in his tent. And because of that, of doing that, the whole, it didn't just hurt him, it hurt his whole family. And so eventually he did have to, then they were going to go to this other place, Achan, and they sent some soldiers ahead, 2,000, I believe. And it wasn't Jericho that we know the walls just came down. That wasn't the case in their next, in Achan, or whatever you pronounce it. They lost some men in the when they went forward. So they were wondering what happened, and they found out that it was because Achan had done this thing taken from God instead of from personally. It had hurt the children of Israel, and in fact they couldn't overcome this town. And so he had to confess, because like Joshua, in fact, as I'm speaking, I remember the story of Jonah last week. What happened? We had no difficulty overcoming Jericho, but in this other case, what happened? We weren't able to do what we just did, and that's when Achan had to confess to what he did, and then he and his family were all killed, And then that's when they were. So anyway, thou shalt not covet. And it was blatant disobedience to God.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So his frame of mind was covetous,
disobedience.
Yes. Greed.
Yeah, he was one of the soldiers that saw Jericho come down and participated in the burning of the town and the collecting of the gold and the silver and the cattle that was supposed to go into the treasury of the tabernacle. Mm-hmm. So he knew what God's requirement was. Yeah. So he stole from God. He willfully disobeyed and stole from God. And as a result, the whole army lost their next battle.
And people were killed. It didn't just affect his family, it affected many others, his disobedience.
So interestingly, Joshua prayed to God and said, what happened?
Yeah, he didn't just say, oh, well, whoops, that's too bad.
He prayed to God. He said, this is not right. What happened? Something obviously happened. Mm-hmm. And God revealed to him that somebody disobeyed. Somebody stole what was rightfully God's. And so it was an interesting process, wasn't it? By which Joshua was able to find out what happened. First.
I'm sorry to jump in there, but it's like I'm being cute, but Joshua was in the right frame of mind that he could sense this.
Exactly. So God, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say he went to he who is perfect in knowledge, would always tell you. So.
Yeah. So here are all these, thousands of Jews, and he had to find out who did what. And God, one by one, revealed the right tribe. And then within that tribe, the right family. So he was led to Achan's father. And then he was led to Achan. I mean, it was not like Achan stood up and said, well, I did it. Joshua had to sift through the entire nation to find the right person. And God led him to find the right person.
What struck me was he buried the things that he coveted. That didn't do him any good. And things that are buried will be found out. So that was...
Well, he buried it because he knew it was wrong.
Yeah, but he didn't have it.
He was trying to hide it from everybody else, and he thought he could hide it from God.
Yeah, that's what Elsie always tells a story about her. Is Elsie there, her mother? Yes. Where?
Go ahead, Elsie.
We can't hear you.
No.
Well, anyway, just in disciplining her children, she would say, maybe you think I don't know, but God knows. God knows what's going on. You can't hide it from God.
That's correct, Mary. I'm here. Everyone's confused. That's what we were always taught as a child growing up. Oh, you can hide it from me, but you can't hide it from God.
I was impressed, too, that I couldn't remember that there were over 2 million Israelites, children of it, over 2 million. And I just sort of trying to wrap that around my head, that Joshua's leading over 2 million people. And that's astounding.
Yeah.
And he was able to because he knew that it was God doing it.
Yeah.
And so that's why to work with the synonyms every day is so important. All knowing. Mrs. Eddy's definition of God in the glossary. All knowing. And then therefore you will know what you need to know whenever you need to know it, which is something Joshua knew. And that's why he could ferret out who did what. And also even to ask God, not to just accept. This is why when things go wrong, don't just accept it. Because that's how I always was. Oh, well. Or you think it's the will of God. That's even worse. That's the old theology. When things go wrong, oh, it's just the will of God.
Mm-mm.
Yeah. And no, you find out. You ask God, well, what is it? What do I need to know here? What do I need to learn? What happened? And it will be revealed to you. If you are in, as Thomas said, the right frame of mind, the godly frame, not covetousness, no ambition, humble, serving, quiet.
In this Jericho struck everybody with awe because, first of all, Jericho was well fortified because they had heard that the children of Israel were coming. So they built up the walls, and they were well fortified.
The iron bars, remember? That's in there.
Right. Yeah. It came down through no human power. It was divine power only. That's the only explanation that those walls came down. There's no other way. Everybody should have been awestruck about the power and ability of Almighty God himself. But if somebody goes through an experience like that and then feels pretty good about themselves, then they really set themselves up. I can just imagine the mindset of Achan thinking, hey, this is working out. I'm feeling pretty good about myself. And I can't imagine how else he could have fallen for this. But, this experience was for God exclusively. They were instructed from the beginning. And indeed, that's how it worked out. People should have just been awestruck with Almighty God.
Thank you. Good point. Mm-hmm. And terror triumph harms. And, I'm sure he thought, I'll just take a little bit. No one will know who, why not? And then it included his family. They were probably complicit in some way, or anyway.
Well, it is obvious that Achan was not being obedient to God. I mean, so when they destroyed Jericho, his frame of mind might not have been about that this was happening because of their obedience to God, and he's all thinking about himself.
Thank you.
So I thought I'd mention that, Mary Baker Eddy wrote an address on obedience. And so in there, I thought it was kind of interesting. I paraphrase this a bit, but she wrote that disobedience is a foe to, quote, grace, peace, and progress. So we know the flip side. If we want grace, peace, and progress, we want to be
obedient.
Yeah. So this is in miscellaneous writings on page 116.
Right.
Address.
Thank you.
Very good. Very good.
And that's
also interesting. I was just going to say, as a result of the obedience of the after this event, was every city that they came to, they were allowed to take from after Jericho. They were allowed to take from them for their own personal whatever they needed. They were allowed to keep them for themselves. But it was in this case that it all had to go into the treasury for God. But after this, they were allowed to take personally what they wanted when they conquered a city. So their obedience was rewarded.
That is very interesting. That's the first fruits go to God.
Right.
Tithing go to God.
Yeah, that's a good lesson in tithing, isn't it?
And that's very, very interesting. And he jumped the gun. He was being tested, and he failed that test. Yeah, good lesson in tithing.
I think that's such an important thing, that it's obedience to God first, because I think too many people maybe this is what happened with him, was that he thought because it wasn't one of his people, it was an enemy, that it was okay to take whatever he wanted.
Yeah. But he was stealing from God in this case. But that's a good point about obedience, because doesn't the manual of the Mother Church have some estoppel clauses in it? and haven't they been disobeyed? So is it any wonder that the organization that is supposed to follow that manual is not prospering, is not healing?
Made themselves the foes of grace, peace, and progress. Is that?
Yes. Thank you. Yep. Quote from Obedience from Thomas. Yep. And that's true of our nation.
We have a constitution.
Yep.
That was given by God.
Yeah. By the way, if anybody has...
Go ahead, please.
Insert real quickly. If anybody hasn't seen it recently, because we just finished watching or listening to Constitution 101, the series on John Adams is absolutely so wonderful. If anybody hasn't seen it, it's just so timely for right now, what's going on. But highly recommend John Adams.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Definitely. Yep. We've seen that. We've gone through a lot of different things, and it's very important you understand this history deeply.
And he was a deep
talk about service and obedience, and you know, giving up his own personal life for people he was never going to meet. Amazing.
Mm-hmm.
That's why what we're being required to do is really not that much compared to what others before us. But that's why we must be all the more vigilant and working all the more that we don't lose this precious science we've been given and a way of life with freedom and justice for all, which is how it should be and how it can become if we hold the right ideal of the United States of America in our hearts and minds and souls.
And that means to uphold the Constitution and obey it.
Yeah. By leading moral lives and being Christians.
So I was reading in some Bible commentary, and I'll just quote this, but it says here that every attempt of evil to harm good is futile. It ends in the fiery punishment of the evildoer. As we talk about, air destroys itself.
Yes.
And this commentary has to do with, there are actually a couple other stories in the Bible that have a similar message as the story about Achan. So this had to do with Nadab and Abihu, who were the sons of Aaron, and they were disobedient in some temple ceremony with the censer and fire, and the fire destroyed them. And they were disobedient. Then the other story is in Acts, and we've talked about this before, about Ananias and Sapphira, who held back, and then they fell dead.
Right. Yep. Don't mess with God.
And again, it's not God. It's the air destroying itself.
It's disobedience being punished. And isn't that what love is all about? Right? The design of love is what?
Reform the sinner.
Yeah, reform the sinner.
So maybe we want to talk about our third question. So what does it mean to live quietly? And if maybe someone wants to read 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 11, or 11 and 12 if you like.
Well, I found a very interesting in my book, which I got from my grandfather, the Student's New Testament compilation. I found an interesting commentary on that. The verse says, "And that ye study to be quiet, and to do your own business, and to work with your own hands, as we commanded you." And the commentary says, a peculiar situation existed in the Thessalonian church. The Advent had been promised. This Advent had been interpreted as a dissolution of the material earth and man, instead of, as it is in fact, the dissolution of material belief. As a consequence of this mistaken point of view, the more zealous members calmly gave up their daily routine of duties and livelihood and lived on the more practical members, who, being more scientific, continued their activities. This latter group realized that the truth must be demonstrated by each on the plane of activity, where truth found him. To leap disdainfully over this school of experience, this application of principle to our daily routine, was to miss this very experience of the advent of the Christ idea in our own lives, and so to fail to break down those limitations which seemingly hedge about all of our human activities.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very good.
Reminds me of Bicknell Young. He's saying, you don't know yourself until you do church work.
Yeah, right. That's right. You certainly get tested and tried in that.
Well, in verse 12 here, continuing that statement on 11, that ye may walk honestly toward them that are without, and that ye may have lack of nothing. So don't be impractical.
And to do your own business. You know, people today, a lot of people seem to want to get into other people's business. And I mean, it just seems to be an overall, it says in this commentary, I can't remember which one it was, that Christians should study how to be quiet, be calm, but not when you want to get into other people's business, you're revealing your own uneasiness, your own disquiet in your own thinking. If you try to involve yourself or are busy wondering what others are doing and want to get involved in their business, it shows where you are in your thinking.
Yes, it reeks of human ambition, doesn't it? And malpractice.
Discontent. What does Mrs. Eddy say? Improving your time, about not being a busybody. I looked up that word quiet. She said, Mrs. Eddy says in Collect Tanya, she makes that study to be quiet. I used to study to be quiet. That's really interesting. But then I realized so often I wasn't quiet, and you can't really pray and garner all the truths in our lessons if you are disturbed in some way or you're preoccupied. Quietness is a tremendous quality, and the definition: to be still, free from the claim of disturbance, not crying, not restless, calm, not agitated. And I love what Mrs. Eddy says. Most of you know that I love to observe Christmas in what?
Quietude.
It's just beautiful.
So what's required in order to be quiet?
A trust.
Absolute reliance on God.
Yeah, we can go back to Joshua, can't we? I mean, he was in the middle of all these battles, but he was quiet.
It's amazing.
He heard God. He was quiet enough to hear when God directed him. And he was obedient. Can you be quiet and peaceful if you're disobedient?
No.
No.
Human will is never quiet.
That's right.
No.
Exactly.
That's why the human will needs to be subdued. And in its place, a conviction that you're going to follow God's will and nothing's going to take you off.
And it's like, I don't know if it's in the lesson this week or not, but where Jesus said, I came, I was sent here not to do my own will, but to do the will of him that sent me.
There's another phrase from Genesis 1 where it says to replenish and subdue. So the mind needs to be replenished with the thoughts of God, and mortal mind needs to be subdued.
Also, what other comes to me is that standing, having done all stand. That to me also has something to do with being that's quiet.
Yep.
And there were
passages in the Bible where it talks about stand still, sit down, and listen. I mean, there's quite a few. I can't remember them all right now, but to be still. There's many passages that to be still, or stand still and wait for the salvation of the Lord. Be still and know that I am God. There's many times throughout the Bible. It's a reminder to just be quiet, be still, trust.
And that's standing porter at the door of thought. It's a standing. So you don't let all these complicated thoughts come in and disturb you. And it's a requirement. And then, I've always loved that. And the work of righteousness shall be peace. And the effect of righteousness, quietness and assurance forever. And in Ecclesiastes, it says, better is a handful with quietness than both hands full with travail and vexation of spirit. And see, that's what we had with Achan, right? He wanted a handful of things. And so, more than a handful.
Yeah, to stop that and put 40 pounds of whatever in your pack.
Right.
And then bury it under your tent.
And then bury it under your tent that probably that other guy made who was doing his own work.
So to emphasize some of the words in this verse, do your own business and work with your own hands. So I think that's telling us to be productive, and that's what we were starting out with the quotes at the beginning about doing the work. The lesson we learned about someone who was being very irritable about doing domestic work.
I was in the wrong frame of mind. Yes.
Yeah.
And she was losing an opportunity to demonstrate and to be close to her father, as was what was read from Janet every moment. And when you're thinking, I'd rather be doing this, or my work is so menial, and look at Cindy Lou over there, she's got everything and I don't have anything. That's the covetousness, that's the agitation, that's where you lose your quietness. And you lose that, you lose everything.
So if you think about it, if you do your own business and you work with your own hands, you're taking care of things, and it could be as simple as vacuuming your house, or doing dishes, or taking out the garbage, or it could be, and that's going to help the family, right? Everybody who lives there. And then it's doing church work. As Mary said, washing cleaning the bathrooms and things like that. That's helping the church community. So when we do those things, living quietly and doing the work that's kind of our plain duty to do, we're helping others by doing that. So think about how much we're blessing other people by living quietly.
Well, this says volumes about what business really is, doesn't it? Because in this case, to live quietly, as we've talked about, it means to mind your own business and to do it, and to do it well. And what is our business? What is your business?
To do the will of God.
Exactly. It's to do what God has for you to do. He's given us all talents, and they're all different, and we all have a different place in this world, but we all have something to do, and God knows what it is. You know, whether you're the janitor in the school or whether you're the president of the United States, God has something for you to do. And in the case of Mrs. Eddy's home, she knew there wasn't anything such as material work. Every job is directed by God if we will listen and obey. So that's what business really is. And in fact, there's we have articles on our website about business that make that very point.
It also makes me wonder about this student of Mrs. Eddy's, that she wanted recognition for what she did. Who was doing this all? Who brought down the walls of Jericho? You know, we can't see God behind all of these things. And where is there any room for personal recognition?
And if we see God in our business, we're happy to do what God wants for us to do.
We've told you about that movie, the series that Luann told us about called The Chosen, just about Christ Jesus. We're all watching it again. And one thing that impressed me so much about it is the way there's certainly no personal sense about Jesus when he turns the water into wine, when he got so many fish for the Peter on his boat. He would pray to God, but then it was like, oh, wow, isn't this great? Look what my Father's done. Wow, this is fantastic. It's just such a sense of God doing it. It's so beautiful to me because it's such a strong reminder that must be our attitude. I of my own self can do nothing. It's the Father. And when you get into that spirit, it is just wonderful. Look what God has done. And to be so grateful and to see it on a day-to-day basis in your life. And that's living the quiet life. But this whole Bible study is about.
And that's where Joshua was.
Yes, he was.
Achan was not.
It's all about him. And God would have supplied his every need if he had been patient and obedient. Instead, he thought he had to do it, and he ruined it all.
It for everybody.
And he ruined it for everybody. Mm-hmm.
But it was a good lesson, wasn't it?
Yeah. Obey.
And that beautiful hymn, number 49, and take from us now the strain and stress, and let our ordered lives confess the beauty of thy peace.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Living a quiet life.